Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Polytalk EDU. Today's distinguished guest is Professor Mark Sadler from NLC. He is a PhD in philosophy, and he teaches philosophy and logic here at NLC. So we will be talking today. So first of all, welcome on board, Mr. Sadler.
Thank you.
Yeah. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and their impact on political thought at large, and then their impact on Western style philosophy and politics, and then their impact, in a way, the direct venue, if we may say, on American politics today, or American just viewpoint about democracy and political thought. That's basically the topic for today. So without further ado, welcome aboard again, and then let's go.
Okay. Well, first, it's interesting that we are in 2023, considering the thoughts of three men who have been dead at a minimum of 2,300 years, who walked around in togas. So the fact that they're still important is telling, especially not just the Western world. I mean, we could look at many places in the Eastern world, which I'm sure, Motion, you could also address, in lots of ways, that these are men that are important on every collected human culture on our planet. The question really for me, and you and I have briefly kind of talked about this privately before, is why they're so important. Well, in a nutshell, Socrates convinced us that humanity itself is important. So his classic defense at his trial before he dies was that he was a humanist, not a materialist. His famous student, Plato, went a step further and connected human needs, human ideals and desires to reality, questions about ultimate reality, which in philosophy, like every profession, we have to have complicated special terms for what we're talking about. But we call it metaphysics because of a book written by Aristotle. And then we got Aristotle, who thought, yes, the reality comes into who we are as beings, but we beings help shape reality. And so you have this kind of almost evolution of thought among these three great thinkers. Not that it ended with them, but they kind of just set the playing field for almost all human discourse that came after. So yeah, these are very important individuals.
Okay. Now, in sequence, we can talk about the issue again. They are starting with Socrates and Plato, and then Aristotle. The amazing thing about Socrates' contribution, it came as a narrative through Plato, right?
Right.
Do you think is there any historical events or evidence that Plato was kind of an honest broker in portraying exactly what Socrates wanted to say, or you think there's certain things about Socrates' way of thinking that it just never come to fruition because it was not kind of a firsthand, so to speak?
Well, so for those that are listening to him speak right now, what he's really done is philosophically he's thrown a grenade into the room and then closed the door as he left. So, so there is a whole project called the Historical Socrates. I mean, it's kind of funny to me, amusing to me, given my academic background, how many Jesus-like figures or Mohammed-like figures there are in human history, where we go looking for the historical person. And we try to separate the historical person from the fans and the disciples and things like this, which I don't have an answer to that. Did Plato give us historically accurate descriptions of Socrates? I believe the answer is yes. Some much more intelligent, well-read scholars will disagree with me on this. But I believe yes, and I believe yes for some pretty practical reasons. I don't just read Plato. I can't remember the exact number, but there's at least 3 different authored stories of the Apology, for instance.
Sure.
And they are all very similar. So there's other people that wrote about Socrates. He had run-ins with some of these people, especially the sophists. But they still wrote things down. And so their stories are consistent, at least with Socrates' story. So are we given a good glimpse of Socrates in the works of Plato? I say yes, because I have no reason to think otherwise. But are there fictional Socrateses in the writings of Plato? Well, most assuredly. Case in point, probably the favorite book to talk about with politics and Plato is the Republic. Does the Republic have the real Socrates there? I think no more than the first three chapters of the Republic are actually Socrates, because Socrates never seems to be concerned with reality beyond our experiences. He didn't worry about the ultimate laws that govern the universe. While he was a pious man, he never got into arguments about the identity of the gods and their powers. He did believe that the gods were concerned about mortals, and he actually says that in his pre-death speech in the Apology, when he recognizes he's going to be found guilty. So I think there is a Socrates, a historical figure that we can get to know, but I just see the Socrates that worries about metaphysics and epistemology and the nuances of vocabulary. That's Plato for me. And that is consistent with other writers of the time, other historians who talked about who Plato was in the city. His trial, Plato's trials that he had on the island at Syracuse, where he was basically an imprisoned guest for about a year. The stories we have about him are the kinds that we expect to see later in the Republic, where he worries about the organization of the heavens and is there a meaning to life? Does beauty mean, is it more than merely a term that we apply to objects? He worries about these things. And Socrates never gave evidence of that. So that's why I divide the real Socrates from the character Socrates around the third chapter, maybe earlier, but no later than the third chapter of the Republic.
Okay, great. Well, I was going to try to tackle this issue here. Kind of talk about the tangibles a little bit, okay? Like, for instance, can we break them down in a way, the contributions of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle collectively on Western philosophy, and then talk about the common themes that they all had in their contributions. And after we finish that, I want to discuss individual kind of tangibles, like what is the impact of Socrates individually, Plato's individually, and Aristotle's individually. So collectively, what is their contributions on political
well, to do that, hopefully without violating what you just said, I have to go back to Socrates, because there's this consistent thread that's born in his work. The Socrates' trial, it's known as the Apology, where he defends his actions in the city of Athens that have irritated countless people. It happens shortly after Athens is recovering from losing probably one of the most famous ancient wars that went on for quite a few years, called the Peloponnesian War. Athens picked a fight with Sparta and they lost. The city was devastated. And not just morally devastated or emotionally devastated, they literally lost their wall, they lost their navy, or what was for them primarily their military. And they were struggling with their identity, because up to this point, the city-states in ancient Greece, and this is not unlike the people they're going to follow, Alexander the Great, for instance, or the Roman Empire as it started to march with muscle. They all were trying to make a name for themselves. That's kind of the game in the ancient world, is reputation and name. With that came inherited powers. And Athens was trying to be the big bully on the block. They wanted to defeat everybody, and they were good at it. They had defeated the most powerful nation in their known world, Persia. But their idea was, to keep it overly simple, is they wanted to conquer the world with a sword. At the point of a sword, they wanted to conquer the world and be in charge through power, through might, and through violence. That was, and I don't know who I'm quoting, it may be Thucydides, but one of the old historians of ancient Greece, he said that peace was merely a mild interruption between war. So Athens, that was their mindset. That was the global mindset. Let's conquer the world with sword. and enters a very meek, well-financed, caring, thoughtful man, Socrates. And Plato and Aristotle followed his lead on this. He didn't try to conquer the world with might or violence. He tried to draw the seed of ideas and plant it in the minds of other people, get them to question themselves and the world around them. And as a result, even though Athens lost the war of the Peloponnese, to this very day, here we are, 23, possibly 23 centuries later, Athens is still known for their ideas.
Sure.
And that was earth-shattering, at least in the Mediterranean. That was earth-shattering. It impacted people like Alexander later, who we can talk about when we get to Aristotle. So Plato and Aristotle, they embraced this idea that they embodied this notion of being men of ideas, not merely men of action. And up to that point of Socrates, that's how we measured the world. You go when you read Homer and you read about these great battles and these great motions, the story is always about men of action, Ulysses, etc. You read Hesiod on Works and Days, where he talks about the organization of the gods and things of this nature. These men predate Socrates. They're, again, his stories, fictional or not, myth or not, doesn't matter. They were always stories of men at work, of action, gods at action.
Sure.
When you get to Socrates and then following him, Plato and Aristotle, it became a different world. It became men of ideas, that ideas are actually the precursor to the lever moving the earth, moving the mountain. And so their impact is, in a sense, poetically immeasurable. To put it more quantitatively, there is no other voice that we look to in philosophy that didn't create this notion that the world is a battle of ideas. And then, of course, that becomes obvious in things like economics and politics, morality. And then, as you and I talk favorably, because of my other great interest is film, great stories are actually stories about ideas. Their action is secondary to the ideas. I think that we have the the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle era to thank for that. That's what redefined the human experience of the universe. We became a people of ideas instead of merely a people of action.
Okay, well said. Okay, so it seems like when we talk about, let's say, since the inception time of the United States, let's start with for instance, the Declaration of Independence and the writing of the Constitution. Do we see a direct lineage between any of those great documents that dates back to Spa, as we refer to it?
Yeah. Well, direct would probably be unfair, because there's so many important people that, Montesquieu, who you've named several times, who's an important person. I mean, there's not enough time. An important person, John Locke. You should learn that in junior high, that John Locke is, he's taken out of context, which is okay, but his work is immortalized in the Declaration of Independence with one very important change. He said, Locke said that these natural rights you have because you're a human being, are life, liberty, and the possession of private property, of course, right, the cornerstone of capitalism. We rephrase that as pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, there you go.
But most Americans I've met pursue their happiness by trying to possess as much property as possible.
Exactly.
But John Locke, to put a better point on this, if he's not thanking Francis Bacon, he's thanking people like Plato and Aristotle, especially. Socrates is sadly rarely thanked, but I think it's just because he's overshadowed by the work of people like Plato and Aristotle, because Socrates wrote nothing that we're aware of. But John Locke thanks Plato specifically in several places. And so the notion of natural rights, for instance, the notion of natural rights is you have this right because of what you are, not who you are.
Sure.
We have two people that we need to thank for that, Plato and Aristotle. Okay, I've got it up here. We won't be talking about it today, but I was reading this earlier because it's a book I don't remember actually reading, though I read everything Aristotle wrote, but it's Aristotle on the Constitution of Athens. And Plato is the one that started this ball rolling, where he stated that the human being and any other naturally occurring thing, that they have rights because they exist for a cause. Aristotle put a very fine point on this in his Metaphysics, especially, but even so, one of my favorite works of his is the Categories, where he talks about these kinds of things. And he says everything that exists naturally. Okay, so he's not talking about artifacts, chairs, or tables. He's not talking about techne, things that are developed to enable us to create art, like tables and chairs or paintings. But these naturally occurring things, everything that occurs naturally has a purpose. There are no accidents in Aristotle's world. John Locke is giving thanks and credence to this when he talks about natural rights. But you've got thousands of years of development from people like, well, Thomas Aquinas for sure, Augustine for another, Plotinus for a third, or at least the author of some of his works, Porphyry. This notion that things have rights because of their existence, the fact that they are. But John Locke, yes, he's committed to this truth that things have natural rights. And I think that, and I don't remember where I read this, but Thomas Jefferson, for instance, Benjamin Franklin for another, actually, were very, very much committed to this notion that human beings are things in themselves with rights because they're human. And this high regard for the human animal that they get out of John Locke's natural rights use, we can track back to these two men, Plato and Aristotle, where natural rights were an understanding of the world, that they were independent of gifts from the gods, for instance. And so, yeah, Plato and Aristotle, though not directly, because of how human thought has evolved over the centuries, they are the birth parents, I guess, in my eyes, of this natural rights phenomena, that we have these rights.
So their impact, it may not be, as you mentioned, it's going to be overreaching if we say direct. We should probably say like we're inspired, by those kind of notions. Because a lot of times, even in the writing of the Constitution, we talked about the direct impact of John Locke, the inspiration. Actually, it was more than that. But also, we talk about like Rousseau. We talk about Hobbes.
Yeah, Hobbes.
They have some kind of impact, but it's not direct. It's kind of an inspired, thoughts. And then maybe the one that was inspiring the writing of the founding fathers, maybe they are the ones who were inspired by Plato, Socrates, and then Aristotle.
Well, I think with the exception of Plato's Republic, and then Aristotle's understanding of constitution, that between these two, though, I think a major portion of the pie goes to Plato's contribution. The Republic is, it can't be understated how important this work was to the founding fathers. To the degree, one of the things that I've done and to help fund my schooling was I worked in libraries. So I learned the Library of Congress system. At least I had it pretty much memorized at one time. My library at the house is sorted by the Library of Congress. And to this day, I've only found one meaningful, important work of philosophy that's not in the philosophy section, and that's the book, The Republic. If you look at the Library of Congress, it is separately filed with the law section. And I think that is a good metaphor for how impactful the work of Plato was to this nation, and this notion that John Locke embraced as strongly as he did natural rights, and that was ruled by elitists. The Republic argues against a raw democracy. Aristotle's work also argues against a raw democracy. They both describe it unfavorably, Plato explicitly, as mob rule, because they saw the danger. They saw this during the days of Solon. His name's normally pronounced Solon or Solon in our books, but his name is actually pronounced Solon. And he was the first liberator of Athens, Greece. And during that time, Solon got rid of all the debt people that was attached to land, because only the rich aristocracy could own land. It haunts to what's going to happen in Europe about 1,500 years later. But so the poor, not the poor, but just the people who weren't land owners, they would have to rent that land to farm it. In America, we call that sharecropping.
Sure.
And they had to pay a tithe of 1/6 of their produce to keep that lease going to sharecrop, which probably wasn't unfair. That's probably a reasonable amount. But what Solon did was he forgave all those loans that was causing sharecropping. And as a result of that, it empowered the non-landowners for the first time. But the result of that was, by many historians' opinion, was that those people, the poor, actually became in charge because they outnumbered the landowners. And they started making all kinds of crazy laws that were in their best interest, but not in the interest of the community. It would have impoverished many of the city-states. So Plato, anyway, he saw all that. He lived through the results of that. And so when he says democracy itself is mob rule, he's got strong empirical data to back himself up, because it almost destroyed many of the city-states. And what he said was, we need people who are qualified and competent to rule. So there's your elitism. Not anyone can do this. And then everyone gets a voice, but your voice is shared with these leaders. And then those leaders are the ones that are going to get together and negotiate the organization of the country, the decisions that need to be made about law, commerce, etc. And today in America, we try, or at least we did in the founding fathers, try to mimic exactly that. We heard the warning. Again, I don't remember who it was, but one of the signers of the Declaration that I remember reading stated that we don't want to repeat some of the things that happened. And one of the things I believe was mentioned was the Tea Party in Boston, where a mob got together and did violence on British property as part of the taxation without representation riots. And he didn't want that to happen once America, the colonies, were now their own independent nation. He didn't want us rising up and having the power to do that again. So they went with the Democratic Republic. So they supported the notion that John Locke supported, which was elitism. Some people are meant to lead, some people are not. Some people are more qualified to lead than others, and those are the ones that should lead us. And that comes directly from the Republic, which is why we are called a democratic republic today.
Right. Because
so there you have a direct appeal to Plato.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, with the republic, I mean, everybody is supposed to be, they're doing what they are ordained, I guess, to do, not because of their legacy, because their father was a military officer or he's a business. You're going to have to continue on that tradition. You have to kind of be recognized for your own ability, not kind of fathered in legacy in a way. Right.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that a lot of people, you don't read a lot of people talking about this, sadly, is it actually goes back to Socrates now.
Right.
We actually talk about this in my intro classes. We go through the entire Apology rather carefully, because there's a lot of wonderful lessons in it. But one of the interesting things about the Apology is you find out about this oracle at Delphi who speaks for the god Apollo. And this oracle sends a message to the ears of Socrates, because he's not there. The word there can be, a Greek word can be used for close friend or distant relative. And so a cousin or a friend of his goes to the island and to Delphi to speak to the prophet there, if that represents the oracle at Delphi. And he asks the question about who's wisest in Athens. And the oration, technically, is there is none wiser than Socrates. It has been simplified by some people as Socrates is the wisest man. And I'm going to use my hands for the gesture for this, but the notion that Socrates is the wisest man is kind of like a triangle. resting on on one side, with the peak being the top, like a mountain, with Socrates on top, above all the other citizens of Athens. That is the notion of Socrates as the wisest. But that's not the oration. And Socrates took this very seriously, and so did Plato. Socrates says, no, no, no. The oration is, there is none wiser than me. So that leaves room for a plateau to be built with all the wise people that are equal in wisdom to Socrates on the top of this peak. And the other notion is the rest of the people don't get all the way to the top. So kind of like part of a rhombus or something, maybe. Okay. Plato ran with this. He ran with it. Now, again, this is my conjecture as a historian, but I think he took what Socrates shared in his death speeches very seriously. And that was Plato's idea for building a world, that the world should recognize that not everybody can be on the top. Not everybody can be Socrates. And we shouldn't expect them to be, because this gives them unrealistic expectations and demands. It causes frustration. People surrender and try nothing at all, or whatever, whatever despair causes in this person. And so Plato's idea was, let's help everybody we can get as close to the top as possible. And all that are capable of getting on top, the elite, get them up here. This was his idea for the academy. His idea was, we will build a school, now the blueprint of all universities, where we collect all these different thoughts. They had to qualify. Plato didn't let just anybody in. Let them start their own school. So the Stoics and the Cynics, the Parmenideans, the Pythagoreans, everybody, they got to bring their ideas to the table in their own college. Plato's, of course, was center in the garden. And that's why he mainly wrote dialogues, so people could read the dialogue out loud. And it was like listening to a radio play, what we would call a radio play anyway. And so his idea was, if we give everybody enough experience, those who are able will reach the top, and everybody else will rise to the highest level that they can. He said, that's our goal as human beings. And I agree with him 100%. This is why I stopped changed my major from physics to philosophy, because I think that's right. Some people are very good at math. We need to help them be as good at math as they can. Some people, they look at math and they not only do they don't have any interest, they don't have any understanding. They don't get the joy of predicate calculus, and they give up.
So it's kind of like modern day, like like a comparative advantage, like in economic terms, how it is. Somebody's thriving at something they're good at, instead of reinventing the wheel, just go back to somebody that to harness certain things that come naturally to certain individuals.
Right. Well, and let those people live the life that, now that's where we jump up to Aristotle with the notion of purpose. Let these people live the life that they were built to live.
Okay.
Today, I despair sometimes when I look at our society today, that we have these lies that we share, well, at least, okay, what I believe are lies, meaning a moral failure of untruth, that people are going around telling everybody, you can do anything you want to do. You can be anybody you want to be. Well, that's not true. And telling people that is harmful. At the same time, telling people that as long as you try hard enough and you do it correctly, you can do anything, creates a lot of stress in their lives, because what if they can't? And of course, we tend to do philosophy from our own experience. And my experience is I had to overcome an incredible reading disadvantage. I didn't learn how to read functionally until practically, or in a real way, until ninth grade in high school, because I have dyslexia. In the 1960s, none of my teachers knew what that meant. So they just put it, and we actually, after my mother's funeral, we saw my fifth grade report card. I share this with my kids, my students, but my kids too. It says retarded with an asterisk right next to my name on my report card. Oh. In the 1960s, that was not a slam. That was a diagnosis. Right. But they didn't know what dyslexia was, but they knew I couldn't read. So I had to overcome that. So, and I share that with my students, so they all know. I know when I say you may have to overcome some challenges in life, I'm speaking from experience. Right. But at the same time, I was meant to be something that I wasn't currently at that moment. And a ninth grade librarian in my ninth grade high school class, she recognized my problem, and she used to sit with me at lunch and during study hour, okay, in ninth grade, and she taught me how to read with a very challenging book at the time. It was Frank Herbert's Dune, which won a Hugo Award, and it has its own language, which I now know sounds a whole lot like Arabic after being in Arabia. And but I had to learn, so it had its own phony language like Tolkien's Elvish, and I had to learn to read. And she diagnosed my problem correctly, and then she helped me climb up the ramp to the highest plateau that I could get to. And as a result of this woman's, whose name I can't remember, unfortunately, or I would make a shrine for her in my house. That is not merely a poetic claim. I would actually do it. That woman saved me from a life of abandoning on myself and giving up on myself. And so I go on from that to, learning other languages and getting a PhD in philosophy and going to Notre Dame and studying with some great minds there. But that woman enabled me to climb up that ramp. She saw what I was missing, but that I had the ability to go farther. That I support. That's what Plato was arguing for, and that John Locke agreed with. And so the Republic, in Plato's eyes, that John Locke supported, I believe, was the community, not necessarily the government arm, but the community needs to help the people know who they are, know what their abilities and their purpose are, and then help them achieve their purpose, not my purpose.
Right. So
And
that was,
when we do that,
what you're just describing, Professor Sadler, it was a very tough road to get to where you're at today, but it was challenging, it was rewarding, and it was also doable, meaning that she put you on the right path to get to somewhere, as opposed to just having unrealistic expectations. And that actually speaks volumes about today. Everybody wants to be the next Michael Jordan or the next LeBron James, right? But the problem is, realistically, for every dream for every individual who can play basketball well, who can accomplish that dream, there's millions of people who actually not going to be able to accomplish that, because that's like a very unrealistic something to do. So that's I'm glad that you kept mentioning that, because getting back to a very basic level on not giving up on your dreams, but also to have realistic dreams and how to actually wind up getting there. Not every thought you want to get, I want to be the next king of England. Well, that's not going to happen, as nice of a job as that will be, but that's not going to happen. So if that's going to be your dream, you're always going to get disappointed. You're not going to achieve that, So you might as well.
Or what if you do? Or what if you do? But in the process, you've actually surrendered something greater that you don't have the imagination to determine in the first place. Like, for instance, myself, I never would have imagined me doing what I do today. And I love what I do. My goal is to educate and inspire people to be as well. It's the thesis of the book I haven't finished on anthropology. It's a philosophical anthropology. What does it mean to be a human? And the tagline is, you have one duty in life: to be the best you that you can be. The whole book is an argument for that.
Oh,
and
okay.
of course, I believe it, or I wouldn't argue for it, because I'm not at a university. I don't have to publish or perish. I can publish what I wish. So I write about things that I care about. And that's what I get to do for a living until I'm done. And even if when I retire and stop teaching at whatever school I'm currently teaching at, I will always do that. Human beings are too valuable. I learned that from Socrates. Human beings are valuable. Top being a human. Well, you could be God. I don't want the responsibility. Okay. I've seen Bruce Almighty. I don't want to do that. So what I wanted to do, if it's okay with you, is I'd like to jump to our other shared love film for just a brief moment as an illustration.
Sure. We'll do a whole episode about that, but just go ahead.
Yeah, but this is not a particular film. It's about an actress, but I can't remember if I'm remembering the right actress. And forgive me for this phrase, because I'm using the actress's line. It's not mine. But this woman claimed that she was the ugliest woman in Hollywood, and it was probably true. I think it was the actress that played the Wicked Witch in Wizard of Oz, but I'm not sure, because there's several women about the same time period. But anyway, this woman, very unattractive physical specimen of female humanity. She was not curvy at all when she was a teenager, and that gave her self-image problem. And this is, if I remember right, this actress grew up in just after the Great Depression, so she's about the same age as my parents were. But anyway, she grew up in this time where she was tragically aware of her lack of beauty, and that drove her into acting as an escape at first. These are her own words. She actually wrote an autobiography that I read. And I'm just embarrassed. I can't remember who she was right now. But anyway, she beat herself up about this. Well, see, she was wanting to be like these starlets in Hollywood, you know, and she wasn't. And she never was going to be. This is before reparation surgery that unfortunately now we've turned into a commodity known as plastic surgery.
Sure.
So what happened was she got discovered. I can't exactly remember where, by whom, but she was in a play. She got discovered by somebody in Hollywood, brought to Hollywood for some screen tests, and started getting work. She was in more movies than any other female in Hollywood during her active years in Hollywood.
Wow.
Because the other model was this very pretty or very talented dance singer type of ladies, but always at least reasonably attractive young ladies. They get called into Hollywood all the time. You know, they're waiting tables at the Brown Derby or just whatever, and they get called in. I read recently a biography about a woman who had a good stint in the 40s, and she got discovered. She was doing manicures, and that's how she got discovered. She got discovered because of her beauty. No shame, but that's why she got discovered. We'll see these young ladies got discovered because of their beauty, and then they would be in film for maybe 5 years. But gravity, sunshine, and extra gravy are not a woman's best friends, or a man's, and their beauty would wane. Well, there's more beautiful young women just waiting to be discovered. So those women's career, the career of those women was over because they lost their youthful beauty. No matter how good an actress they were, it didn't matter for most of them. But this woman, and I say this a lot, matter of fact, it's one of my wife's favorite sayings in our household. If you can't lose it if you don't have it. So she kept acting. She played the nosy neighbor. She played the condescending teacher. She played these people in the periphery of the movies that made the movies work. Sometimes Alfred Hitchcock coined the phrase the MacGuffin. She sometimes was even the MacGuffin, this little trick that made the story work. And she was constantly at work. She laughed all the way to the bank. But what's interesting is she realized this early in her career. She was never going to be one of those physically beautiful starlets.
Because those qualities are gonna fade.
Well,
One day.
possibly. Now you have
Right.
exceptions. You have Myrna Loy or somebody like that who acted for
Right,
an enormous long time and didn't seem to lose her youth. But her point was even more visceral and gut-like than that. She realized she was reaching for the wrong ring at the merry-go-round.
right.
She realized that what she was a character actress.
Sure.
And that's who she needed to be. Embrace. She figured out who she was. She embraced who she was, and she blossomed into a very reliable, well-respected actress.
Absolutely.
Because she discovered that she was trying to be somebody that she's not. Today, I don't think that's the message in our culture. I think the culture, they have these unrealistic expectations and these unrealistic promises that Plato would not just laugh at, not just condemn. He would see them worthy of something like a death penalty, because you're killing off the hopes and the dreams of your society by giving them the wrong goals.
Absolutely. So just for the future, as we casually talked, at some point, we will be taking on some famous movies and designating some of those podcasts for that. We talked about like Casablanca. We talked about Bridge on the River Kwai. We talked about Godfather, obviously. And there's a lot of good movies we can actually discuss, and we can talk about maybe a couple per episode, or we can just designate one per episode as well. So this will be highly entertaining, and they have a great value as well, in terms of this culture. Now, Mark, let me just kind of ask you this question. And you and I, we were just casually discussing this multiple times. We both don't have any prepared notes for this. We're just kind of chatting and talking about something very valuable, hopefully.
Well, I wish I had a fireplace video because it's rainy and it would remind
I
me of
know.
being back
Yes,
in
I
Indiana.
know.
Then
Now,
it could be a fireside
we
chat.
often talk about, let's say, the vision when Socrates and Plato and then Aristotle talked about democracy and their impact on political thought. They probably had, I mean, but and that's like a kind of was manifested in Plato's work in the Republic, the virtuous cities, what things ought to be done. Now, the type of democracy we have now, not just in the United States. The United States, we can claim we are the oldest democracy, or the oldest living democracy today. We have multiple different kind of different style, different democratic styles all over the world. I want you to tell me collectively the vision that they had about how democracy ought to be compared to how democracy actually is today. Would they be happy? Would they be kind of like yes, or what does hypothetically their own democracy today? How because everything we kind of attribute back to them. So
Yeah.
how are we compared to their line of thinking?
Okay, well, first, let me make a very direct observation on your question. If you're going to push me right up against the cliff, you at least have to tie your rope to me. So if I go off, you go with me. Um, that's I'm not going to shrink away from doing this. I do this for a living. I'm going to give my opinion, but that's all it is.
Yes,
It's not weak because I'm a human being. I mean, I'm a PhD in philosophy. I spend an enormous amount of time in the ancients, but that doesn't make me an expert. But my opinion is this, my educated guess is, I think Plato and Aristotle would be thrilled that we tried, but they wouldn't give us passing marks. And this brings us to the concept that I'm working on right now in my own research that I shared with you on this notion of freedom. So
yes,
the word is allutheria, which is the nominative case, the noun case of the word. But they had this notion of freedom that they were trying to come to grips with in democracy, because the notion of democracy, as we understand it today, is it's overshadowed too much by a misunderstanding of the word freedom. So, case in point, that's a democratic nation. Okay, that's a free nation. This notion. Well, the notion that we have a freedom today that I think would spark the complaints of Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle, is this notion that we think freedom today means freedom from. So the arguments that we have going on right now with the recent, dethroning of the Speaker of the House, and lots of other arguments over the years in the
sure,
past, they've lost the vision that's one of the necessary components for Plato's idea of a free republic, and Aristotle's, I won't say correction, but additions to that, or the filling out of what that means in his politics. And to start with somebody who I have said, and I'm on record as saying, I think he's an overrated president, but he had good speech writers, JFK. And he, with that beautiful New England accent, tells us, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
sure,
Well, Aristotle and Plato would agree with that. They would say, you know what? You are a citizen. Your loyalty should direct your work. I think that's a direct quote. Your loyalty should direct your work. Today, we don't have that idea. We walk around metaphorically in our society with our hand out, waiting for the government to do something that we desire them to do, rather than ask them, how can I help make our country great? So for me, at least in my research at this point, it's only been reinforced since you and I first talked about this, that we have a misunderstanding notion of this notion of freedom. In Plato's day, he was finalizing the idea. In Aristotle's day, it came to fruition, it bloomed, it
sure.
blossomed. But it was the notion of, it's not, freedom doesn't mean to be free from something, but to be free to be something. And so, in other words, I don't stop you from being all that you can be. So you're not free of obligation. You're not free of expectation. You're not free of responsibilities. Those are binding commitments in a working society. Today, it's amazing to me, though understandable, that people energetically flee from opportunities to be active citizens. Case in point that most people will agree with, I'm pretty sure, is we get the jury summons and we got to go do jury duty. Even how I say it, I got to go do jury duty. My wife and I talked about this. I have a couple students who got called for jury duty. They were not aware that students can beg out. What's interesting is professors cannot. So one person doesn't have to miss a class, but we can cancel all the classes of that professor for jury duty. Now, I personally have only been on one jury. I never get past the voir dire. But I think citizens, well, let me finish that thought. I don't get past the voir dire because what they do is they verify what I do for a living. And then I have a PhD in philosophy. And they say, we reject this candidate on cause. And that's all they have to basically say, and bang, until you get your number, whatever the judge gives you, you can use those how you want. Now, I don't know this to be true, but my suspicion, strongly held, is they don't want me to think on a jury. They want me to emote. But I have been on one jury, and because I thought it's my duty. I'm a citizen. I am free to be a good citizen, and a good citizen in a democracy participates. But today we seem to be inciting a new kind of way of being, which is free from. I don't want to be responsible. And then there's obvious, really bad, not bad examples, but really obvious examples in some of the bad activity going on in the news. People rioting and doing great damage and harm to people and property, or looting and robbing these stores to the point that they move out of that city area because they can't make a profit. They want to be free from being arrested, and they want to be free from responsibility for their actions. They don't want to wear labels like hoodlum, burglar, criminal. They don't want to wear these things. And there are communities where leaders refuse to let those labels be used. That is all, I think, an outgrowth of this mistaken notion of freedom. So would Plato and Aristotle like our society today? Probably not. Even though I like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, I don't think Abraham Lincoln would either. He wouldn't say party on, dudes. But I think they would applaud that we started on the right track, but we didn't get where we should have gone. And I think personally, having traveled the world a lot in the US military, I've been to a lot of interesting places, and I choose still to live in America because I think it's a great place to live. But unfortunately, we're not giving people outside our borders great hope in democracy. We're not showing them that democracy can work. And so I think in certain places on our planet, human societies are actually choosing non-democratic processes because they're not seeing the success that we had before, when we had a different understanding of obligation and freedom. And then Plato would condemn that, because one of the roles of a good community, he believes, he says this in the Republic, is to inspire greatness in others. So in other words, Sparta would look at Athens and see how successful Athens is, and Sparta would go, we want to be successful. Well, what are we doing wrong here that we're not successful? And and this did happen in the early Greek world. People started modeling themselves after Athens. Schools started coming up. They'd go to Plato and find out how he created the academy, for instance, and then they would go and try to do something similar because they saw a great, wonderful community coming up out of this. America right now, we don't have anything to sell.
Yeah. All right. Well, so far, the discussions we've had, it's kind of really hard in many ways to separate Socrates from Plato, and for understandable reasons, historical, ties and all that stuff. And now we got about inside 10 minutes to conclude this podcast, and then with the, future promise to have other ones more designated and kind of more, narrow in its scope, and then focusing on one element as opposed to just at large. For the next 10 minutes or so, let's talk about politics, the work of Aristotle. just kind of break it down to us, the importance of that, and also how
I didn't hear what you said. You said the work of something, but I didn't hear that word.
politics, the book of the book from Aristotle,
Oh, okay.
the work of Aristotle, politics.
Okay.
Yeah, and talk about that a little bit, break it down for us, and then talk about the relationship between Aristotle and Plato, as opposed to like Plato versus Socrates.
Well, I think I'll do the second one first because I think that'll work better. That'll probably
Okay,
take our 10
sure.
minutes. And maybe
Absolutely.
next time we could talk about the politics itself.
Yes.
Because politics, depending on who we talk to and who we read, it seems to be part of his later corpus, his later body of work. But his motivations early on were political in the Greek sense of the word polis. So the polis or police of the ancient world was a city-state. So it was a collection of agreeable people. They agreed to live together. They had ceremonies, like this is San Antonio, so kind of like a quinceañera, or if it was my friends from Israel, a bar mitzvah. You had a coming-of-age ceremony where you pledge allegiance to the law, not to the community, to the laws. Socrates mentions this in his death speech. And so Aristotle says, looking at Plato's work on democracy, he elevates that. So his idea seems to be that your country, I'm going to use American terms because they didn't have countries. Your country, your city is its laws. How we evaluate your place is
the
your
nation
laws.
state kind of ideas. Yeah.
Excuse me?
The nation state kind of ideas.
The nation state or the city state. But he see, the way we evaluate countries today is so much different. It sounds foreign to us, but even to the founding fathers, again, going to things like Federalist Papers and these other ancient works, not ancient, but old foundational ideas in the founding of our country, these ideas that were recorded for us, they understood this, I think, that we are measured by our laws. That's why there was so much careful crafting of the Declaration and the rewriting of it and the early stage of the Constitution with an explicit allowance for amending. Aristotle, in his politics, what he does is he looks at Plato and sees where Plato failed. And where Plato seems to fall is he's imagining the perfect city, the utopia, this perfect ideal. Because Plato's idea, which I agree with, and I think Aristotle agreed with, was if you want to have a just society, you have to have a just city. What Plato didn't do that Aristotle does is he realizes, well, you can't have a just city without just laws. Now, so we stop there and look at the connection between Plato and Aristotle and how that impacts us today. Our understanding of justice is different now than it was in his day. As a matter of fact, it's one of the vocabulary terms my students learn in here coming up in the next few weeks, because it's considered one of the four Socratic virtues, the four virtues inherited from Socrates. And in that voice, Plato and Socrates, justice is setting the world right. So justice isn't quid pro quo. It's not, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Justice is not, everybody gets the same. None of these things. So communism falls off the wayside rather quickly. So this notion of justice is setting the world right. And what's important there is, and that's why Aristotle, I think, points out, you don't discuss the structure of law, you just discuss the structure of the city. A city can't set the world right if it doesn't have proper laws. So going from Plato to Aristotle and into his book on the politics, laws have two functions. The one that's primary for Aristotle seems to be to give us a model of right and wrong. The second one, less important, is it gives government authority to sanction its citizens. So in other words, the law tells me how to help and punish people. And then you have some laws about laws, and you have some laws about citizenry. So this notion of justice setting the world right sparks this understanding of law as being both a teacher and a cudgel, maybe in some cases, but used in the arm of a just set of rulers. And so we break down that notion of justice into laws for the citizenry, laws for the rulers of the citizenry. And there's a hint here, I think, of Leviathan, later in Leviathan, about the monarchy.
Sure, Hobbes,
So, yeah, with Hobbes. So Plato and Aristotle, his great work of the politics, which we can talk about next time if you still wish to, is this development of a weakness in Plato's idea that, yes, let's have a just city so that we can have a just society, but you can't have a just city with just wise leaders, which is Plato's idea. Those wise leaders, by definition, must be wise because they understand the right laws for the time. And it wasn't Aristotle that wrote this, but somebody commenting on Aristotle many, many years ago basically pointed out, your laws about harvest shouldn't be used during planting, is something to that effect. And that's wisdom. You know, these laws don't apply right now. We're planting, we're not harvesting. And so he wanted to back away from these momentary laws and get to these universal laws. How do I grant people the freedom to be themselves? How do I encourage them to participate? And all of that is just, I think, shoring up the weakness that we find in the Republic.
Okay. So in many ways, what are you describing? It's kind of like highlights also the social contract, right? When you talk about in many ways. Okay. All right. Well, this is we did talk about quite a bit about the Republic. We can still might tackle that at some point, but I would like to have in the upcoming episodes to do one about politics, and maybe the background will be we talk a little bit about Plato's Republic, and then we lead into talk about Aristotle. And also, we don't want to just talk about politics at large. We want to see the contribution of Aristotle, because you did mention that the politics is one of the latter work that he did, but he did a lot of substantial work prior to that.
He wrote every textbook before they existed.
There you go. Okay.
I mean, he created the term species and genus. So he gave his first biology book. His father was court physician, so he saw vivisection, that's cutting up dead things. He saw, live things. He saw dissection, cutting up cadavers. So he saw the inside of human beings and stuff. So many, many years before Grey's Anatomy was a TV show or a book, he was doing human anatomy and understanding the workings of the human being. The man is the epitome of the scholar. That he wrote. He coined the term physics, which we use today, physis. He wrote a whole book on the physical laws of the universe, and beside it comes the book Metaphysics. So yeah, this guy Aristotle, it wasn't just politics. He wrote about everything.
Right. Okay, that sounds perfect, and I think will be worthy of designating a whole episode just discussing Aristotle's contributions, not just to politics and political thoughts and political philosophy, just about other venues as well. So I know you're pressed in time, Professor Sadler. You have a class coming up, and then honestly, we've been talking for an hour. It didn't feel like one. I mean, we just it was highly entertaining. I really learned and I enjoyed. Hopefully, the questions were adequate, to kind of match.
Well, anytime you and I get together, we have fun.
Absolutely. And then again, we have in the pipes a few episodes coming up. One will be about Aristotle, and then as we discussed multiple times, maybe Montesquieu, maybe social contract, modern day.
Yeah, I don't mind spanking people publicly. We can spank social contract all day, every day. Not a problem.
And then for a lighter side, we could do as we oftentimes. One of our favorite movies, both of us, is Casablanca. We will talk about that as well.
The greatest American film ever made.
I agree with you. And then The Godfather and all that stuff. We will talk about that. So, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks for being with me. It was fun.
Absolutely. And I'll see you soon. And then we're looking forward to the next episode coming out rather soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.